Hello, I'm Jesse Mollop and I'm a proud Indigenous man from the Larrakia Nation of the Northern Territory. On behalf of the Imperfects, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people as the traditional custodians of the land on which they record this podcast. We pay our respects to the elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their spiritual connection to family. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are recognised for telling and sharing stories with one another, and the Imperfects draw inspiration from the oldest living culture in the world as they share stories of their own.
Just a heads up, this episode of The Imperfects has some graphic descriptions of panic attacks, so if you feel like this isn't something you want to be hearing right now, it might be worth skipping through those bits when they come up.
Well, here we are, back again.
Actually in the waiting room, is that the idea?
Well, the music is supposed to emulate, pardon the pun, is supposed to emulate the waiting room of a psychologist's office because, of course, we're here to see Dr. Emily again.
Yeah, well, I do like jazz, so that works. I know when I see...
Do you really like jazz?
Yeah, I do.
Who's your favourite jazz musician?
Wynton Marsalis.
Wow!
Yeah, he transcends jazz and classical.
Yeah. Jacques Lussier. I'll do it again, Jacques Lussier.
You are blowing my mind. Can you say a third jazz musician?
Well...
Sorry,
I feel really under the pump here.
Sorry, I'm not doubting that you like jazz. This is just a side of you that I know cricket, I know sprinting, I know Resilience Project, but now jazz, a whole other chapter of your life that I didn't know about.
Well, Josh and I feel like we're heavily influenced by our parents' music, and Dad loves jazz. Yeah. And when he puts jazz on, he does this little move with his shoulders.
Yeah, and
it's just so ever since I've I reckon Josh would like jazz as well, but doesn't listen to it because you've got other stuff that you absolutely love. Anyway, why are we talking about this? Just
how about Jamiroquai? He's more acid jazz, but okay. No, we're in the way.
The reason I was saying it was that I know that in my psychologist waiting room, it's absolute silence. But I love
jazz
it.
Would be good.
I might suggest to her maybe some jazz would be good.
Well, this is more the movie version of a psychologist waiting room.
You're right.
Anyway, without further ado, Dr. Emily for a Dr. Emisode, which is unfortunately become the official name of these. I'm sorry about that. We have not come up with a better idea. Okay, good. How are you, Em?
I'm really good. So nice to see you guys.
So nice to see you.
Very happy to be here.
Okay, well, let's get down to business. And of course, it would not be a Dr. Emisode without the carefully crafted and extremely respectful opener.
Mm-hmm.
Quick! Is anyone here a doctor? Yes, her name is Dr. Emily, and she's a psychologist. Please welcome to the Imperfects, our very own psychologist!
So, Dr. Emily, I'm sure you're sharing that with all of your colleagues. Look how much I'm respected on the Imperfects. You are very respected.
I would love it.
Very respected.
Thank you.
Now, Dr. M, now as some people know who listened to your first episode here, they know that what you do is you listen to all of our episodes and sort of give us feedback on what we should be looking out for, any trigger warnings or anything like that, which is just so beneficial to us, but then also the listeners. But now, when you actually have your own Dr. Emisode, you will specifically pick out a moment from one of our past episodes and give some sort of thoughts based on that, professional thoughts. So for this episode, what would you like to talk about?
Well, Hugh's actually asked if it might be possible for me to talk about Luke's episode, in particular, I guess, in reference to the panic attacks and also that he was talking about too. So I listened to Luke McGregor's episode and was pretty blown away, to be honest, actually, just in terms of how much it really speaks to resilience at its core, really, and how impressive he was to me in terms of how he was managing those difficulties. And there are kind of two things that I wonder whether people might find useful to talk about. And that was in reference to experiencing panic attacks. And then also having a look at, well, how is it that Luke in particular managed so well to manage that in the end?
Yeah. Amazing.
Perfect.
Amazing.
Well, we've got that grab now. Can we maybe play that now, just as a refresher for all our listeners? Even though this episode was out just a few weeks ago, just to refresh everyone's memory. I read somewhere that panic attacks became an issue. Is that right, on stage? Or
Yeah. I had
I started hyperventilating on stage. So I'd have pins and needles all through my body, and I started to become really aware of my breath. And it would sort of, I found it unable to relax, basically. All the timing would go out because I couldn't. All of a sudden, I wasn't breathing properly, or I felt like I wasn't getting enough oxygen in, but I was getting too much, and so I was hyperventilating. So, it was. And then I took a little bit of Valium for it to try and take the edge off, and then I think part of it was, having a panic attack was kind of like the worst thing that could happen to me on stage. It was the thing I was so fearful about. Like, I'd rather faint, because then you just faint. It's not your fault. It's done. Whereas a panic attack does feel like, even though it's not, it felt like it was my fault.
Okay.
Did you have to stop mid-gig, or did you?
Sometimes I'd find a way in the set to, I'd ask an audience a question or something like that. I'd try and find a way, but you're not really, you just have to keep going.
Yeah.
It'd be impossible to do your job.
It made it hard to be funny, because jokes all of a sudden were going, and the audience could tell. Sometimes I just tell the audience I think I'm having a panic attack, and they're always really nice about it. And then I just have to sort of breathe for a second. But after it happened, it was like, okay, so that's happened now. And it's fine. You know, the audience just wants you to do well.
Yeah.
And they're really understanding, and at least that's been my experience. So after the worst thing that could have happened, then it became less of a big deal, I suppose. Yeah.
That's like exposure therapy, I guess.
I guess so, yeah. I don't know if I'd recommend it to everyone, but it was
very brutal exposure therapy.
It was a very generous share, that one. I was, because I think I'm so happy you want to talk about this, Em, because I feel like a lot of people experience this, but it's a confronting and embarrassing experience, I think, for a lot of people.
Mm. Absolutely. And in fact, I was actually looking at the statistics around like the occurrence of panic attacks in the general population, and it's about 40%. So 40% of people in their lifetime will experience a panic attack. But really? To be honest, I actually suspect it's a lot higher than that. Just in like anecdotally, you know, people not necessarily recognizing or noticing that they might have been experiencing a panic attack. So it's extraordinarily common.
What do you mind explaining just what is a panic attack?
Yeah.
Like, how do you know whether it's you've had a panic attack or whether you've just been a bit nervous, you know? Like, what's the difference?
That's such a good question.
God, that feels great. Thanks, Em.
Because it's a pleasure. I think there is a really quite a distinctive experience when you're having a panic attack. And for me, it is really highlighted by the physiological response. So people might say that they feel really panicked or panicky, but perhaps that might be more related to the worries and the thoughts that are showing up around a particular thing. So, for example, you might be really worried about doing an exam, for example, and so you can feel quite worried and a bit anxious. But a panic attack is a far more kind of physiological change, and it is a brief kind of intense episode of fear, in essence. So I don't know if you're willing to share, but have any of you guys had a panic attack or feel like you've had a panic attack before?
I have, and I think I've spoken about it on the podcast, haven't I? I think I've mentioned it
maybe
in an episode. I can't
definitely
remember.
If you're comfortable to share again.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to. I was at home. I was feeling pretty panicky and pretty stressed and upset, and I had a shower because I thought, a shower will make me feel better. Showers always make me feel better. And the stress and panic, I have a feeling at the time I was thinking about my relationship, and I had this thing in my head of like, I'm not good enough for my partner, so who I'm still with, so turns out I was. But I remember at the time thinking I wasn't good enough for her and all this kind of stuff.
She's in the next room. We could bring her and ask her.
Finally get an answer.
Yeah. Not to put you on the spot, but...
my breath was shortening. I started to get really hot even though I was in the shower, but it was like a weird kind of hot, like sweating while underneath the water, and getting tingles in my fingers. I remember being a really strong thing, getting sort of faint as well, and then just sort of, and crying and getting really, and then I sort of goes really hazy, but I collapsed. And the next thing I remember is our golden retriever coming in and kind of helping me. Like the golden retriever kind of noticed and was like, tapping on the glass. Weirdly, while I'm saying this, I'm feeling some of those symptoms really strong. Like I'm starting to get a little bit sweaty. And I remember just being so like out of breath and exhausted, and physically it was such a physical thing. It went from being normal tears to being like, oh my God, am I having a heart attack or something here? Because I just have I was spasming and collapsed, and then hugged the dog for about half an hour or something. And then the next thing I sort of remember in my memory is that I must have called Mum, and she came home from work to help. And then I think Hugh, you got me into a psychologist pretty quickly. And then, and she told me some things which really helped. But it was a terrifyingly physical thing. I knew afterwards what it was, but at the time it was like having a heart attack or something here. Yeah.
And thank you for, for talking that through. I think that's actually a really amazing example of what a panic attack is, and really kind of coming back to that idea that it is such a physiological response, and it feels very distinctive from just feeling anxious or just feeling worried. Yeah,
it certainly feels like it could have started there, but then it became something else. Like it was
absolutely
familiar, and then it became very unfamiliar pretty quickly. Yeah,
and there's really strong. I can kind of go into this in a minute around the physiology of it. But one of the biggest factors when it comes to the kind of development or surging of panic is the breath and hyperventilation in particular. So you described having the tingling in the fingers, and so did Luke. And it's a really common experience when we are having a panic attack. And the reason, or one of the reasons, there are some other reasons for this, but when we start to feel panicked, the heart rate obviously increases, and it's pumping blood to the parts of the body that we need it most for running away or fighting. And what that does is it tends to move the blood away from the extremities, so from your fingers or your toes or your feet. And when the blood moves away from the extremities, that's when we get that kind of tingling sensation, which is a big indicator that our breath rate and our heart rate has changed, and we're tipping into that kind of panic response. Does that kind of make sense?
Totally.
Yeah.
So when it comes to kind of explaining a panic attack, it's primarily this big physiological change. The body is in a state of fear, and obviously I've spoken before about kind of that fight-flight response. This is exactly what's happening when we're in a panic attack. Is it's full-blown fight-flight. We're feeling extraordinarily terrified, and the terror almost comes from an acknowledgement or a detection of some sort of sensation inside the body. I'll explain that in a little bit more, but there is also the cognitive changes that occur when we have a panic attack. And so, Josh, you mentioned like this kind of the thoughts around like worrying that I might be dying or that there's something wrong with me. And it's probably one of the most common presentations at ED, or mistaken presentations, is that we in a panic attack.
What's ED? ED?
Emergency.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in emergency.
Oh,
yeah.
yes. Sorry. Yeah.
So people often present to emergency fearing that they're having fearing that they're having a heart attack, or that they're going crazy, or that there's something wrong with them. And they're the kinds of cognitions that show up when we're having that kind of physiological response. So it's something's wrong with me. My heart's going to explode. My head's going to explode. I'm going crazy. They're really common sorts of thoughts that tend to show up when we have those physiological responses or changes.
And is it even though it's a panic attack and not a heart attack, is it still the right thing to do to go to emergency? Is that still a good response?
Yeah. I mean, well, I certainly want to suggest that people stay at home if they really are worried they're having a panic attack. That would be a heart attack. That would be a very bad piece of advice. But
of course. Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know that. Yeah. I would also. I concur. I would never advise that. So I'm glad we're on the same page. Yeah.
But great. Yeah, look, I don't think there's any harm in presenting there, absolutely, and certainly kind of ruling out any kind of heart conditions would be important, but it's not uncommon for you to be sent home with the doctor saying, look, you've probably had a panic attack, go and see a psychologist, or do a number of things to kind of calm yourself down.
So in that moment, if you feel that, is there anything you can do in the moment when if you feel the tingling in your fingers, there's something you can do to help avoid it becoming a panic attack, or once that happens, it's just going to happen?
If I had a client that was coming to me and they were suffering panic attacks, the very first thing that I would look at doing is understanding what is going on in the body. So you need to understand and to know that there is this change occurring in the body that is not harmful to you. So what happens when those sensations show up is that they bring with this sense of terror or threat, which signals to the brain that I am not safe and I am under threat. But what we really need to kind of come back to is this knowledge that these sensations can be here, but they're not going to harm me. And Luke actually mentioned that too in his episode. He talked about towards the end the fact that these sensations are here. They're not here very appropriately, but I can kind of get on with my life in some way. So the very first thing is having an understanding of what's going on in my body, that this is okay, that it's not going to harm me. I think that makes a really big difference in terms of that kind of terror feeling that shows up. I don't know if you guys experience this, but if you're ever worried or you notice other people worrying or being panicked or upset, do you ever say, take a breath? You just need to breathe.
Yeah. I think it's a pretty common response, isn't it?
Yeah.
Almost like an instinct to say that.
Yeah. So interestingly, what we probably need to reframe it as is take a breath out. And there's a really good reason as to why we want to take a breath out rather than take a breath in. So I don't know if you guys want to try this. So
let's try
it. Let's do it. Yep.
If you wanted to, we can actually start to kind of enact that same kind of sympathetic arousal. So that sympathetic nervous system fight-flight response. And we can do that quite easily by having really short, quick in-breaths. And that short, quick in-breath really starts to tell the body that we're in kind of like a agitated or a mobilized state. So what we're going to do now, this exercise we're going to do is really to give like a simulation in some ways of what it feels like to have a panic attack, and in particular, how focusing on the in-breath and our tendency to focus on the in-breath when we're feeling anxious really exacerbates the feeling of anxiety or panic. So definitely I wouldn't encourage you to try this at home. It's more just an example at the moment for you guys in the room to see what this might feel like. Yeah.
We
so
have
don't
each
try
other's
this
backs.
part at home.
Yeah. It's a good safe space to try it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So quick in breath.
Yeah. So imagine like just taking in really quick ones and not breathing out very much. So going, I don't know if you can do that. Yeah. And as you're doing that, what are you noticing as you're doing that?
I feel like my heart rate's getting faster.
Yeah. To be honest, I'm just wondering, oh God, I hope people don't skip forward into the episode and don't listen to the context before this and just jump in and go and just hear us going. Anyway, that's probably not what I should be thinking, but that is what I was thinking. I was like, God, that would be a weird thing for them to hear. But okay, yes, but I'm the same. I'm feeling like I'm getting more panicked, even though I'm not.
Yeah. So when we feel anxious, we have this very kind of natural urge to take in breath. But what that tends to do is that it creates an imbalance of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the bloodstream. So we actually start to take in too much oxygen, which causes that hyperventilation. And we don't actually breathe the carbon dioxide out. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's really key about the out-breath is it's the out-breath that stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system or the vagus nerve. And I love the vagus nerve. But
is it your favourite nerve?
When it's by far, yeah. When we stimulate that,
Amber's having a poster of it in her wall. It's a big poster of it.
It's my favourite. The vagus nerve is my favourite as well, but I feel like after 2 days, you just want to get out of there. That's what happens in Vegas. It stays in Vegas. Yeah, the Las Vegas reference. That's all right. Sorry.
Yep. So when essentially, I probably really need to be simple in my explanation. When we breathe out and we're breathing out slowly and deliberately, we get an activation of the relaxation response, which is otherwise known as the parasympathetic nervous system. And it's the vagus nerve that is stimulated when we breathe out specifically. So it's not stimulated when we're breathing in. It's only stimulated when we're breathing out. And so if you focus on breathing out rather than breathing in, we can then really actively bring ourselves much more grounded in the present moment and really trying to deliberately shift our experience from that stress, fight, flight response into the relaxation response, the calm kind of engaged state.
That's I find that really interesting because she must have mentioned this at the time and I've forgotten it, but I remember being given a breathing exercise was one of the first things after exactly what you're talking about, understanding that it couldn't hurt me and being told to do a breathing exercise. And it was to breathe in for a number, but then make sure I breathe out for one more. So it was like breathe in for 1, out for 2, in for 2, out for 3. And I've always struggled to remember whether it was breathe in for 3 and out for 2, and like I kept getting it confused. But now I know it must have been out for 3 and in for 2.
Crucial detail.
Yeah,
really
exactly,
crucial.
really crucial. But I forgot it. But so that makes perfect sense. That's exactly what she was getting me to do.
And I guess that's why also when people are hyperventilating, they'll say you need to breathe into a bag because the aim is to try and fill the bag up. And so that's concentrating the out breath, I'm guessing. So it's not just like I thought that was a bit of an old school, like just breathe into the bag, but it's actually saying fill the bag up with air.
Yeah, and I don't really know the science around this, but I would say it's something to do with not taking in the oxygen, you're probably taking in the carbon dioxide, I'm guessing, if it's all in, maybe? I don't know. But it's definitely along the same principles, yeah.
So what you were getting us to do before the short in breaths, is that to precede a big long out breath? Is that why we were doing that?
Well, it's more to give an example, I suppose, as to what happens when we start to feel anxious or I guess how breathing in can really contribute to feeling anxious or feeling panicked.
Oh, so what we were doing?
Don't do that.
Yeah,
don't do the short breaths.
Don't do
the short breaths. Okay, that is good because I was thinking, I feel like we were just doing the thing you said not to do. So that makes a lot of sense. Okay, great. So don't do the short in breaths. Do like a long out breath.
Yeah. I was going to preface this by saying that working with the breath can be tricky if we're really panicked. And so for some people, if it's moving towards the development of what's called what's called panic disorder, we can have like a hypervigilance for our breath. And so sometimes focusing on the breath actually can feel far too overwhelming. So I kind of want to preface it by saying, if you're going to do this work, I'd really encourage you to do it with someone, like with a therapist, and get, kind of some real support behind that. Because sometimes that can almost feel too triggering if we're focusing on the breath.
Amazing.
So there are quite a number of things that we can look at in terms of really supporting us when we're experiencing panic, but then also really looking after ourselves after an experience of a panic attack. But I think this really kind of might tie in a little bit with what Luke mentioned towards the end of his episode around I guess how he managed to live with feelings of panic or feelings of fear. So I don't know if, Josh, you're able to play that.
Yep.
Had incredible anxiety, but it seems like you repeatedly have a way of dealing with it of just going, I'm just going to go all in here. Like that show with the nudity and the stand-up, the acting, it feels like you get to a point, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is more of a question if this is how it feels for you, but where you get to a point where you're like, well, I've got nothing else to lose, I may as well just go for it. And that's a way with dealing with things a bit?
I think maybe it's trying to remind my brain that anxiety can't hurt you. It can make you feel a certain way, but it's not going to make your head explode, or you're not going to start bleeding from your eyes. Like there's a limit to how much damage it can do, and it's temporary. So I try to make a decision I try and take, as much as I can, it's not always easy, I try and take fear out of the equation when I'm making a decision, because if it's the main reason I'm not doing something is out of fear, I'm like, all right, well, what decision would I make if I didn't feel afraid? And then I try and make that decision even though I do feel scared.
Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful. Incredible cognitive sort of thing he's doing there.
I don't understand it.
Absolutely.
I don't understand how. My job is also to be on stage, a bit like Luke. We do something very different when we're on stage, but the smallest things I will worry about, as far as like these shoes aren't comfortable. I can't stand here for an hour and 15 minutes or an hour and a half in these shoes, or the light's strange tonight, or the sound isn't right. sometimes when I don't get the sound right and sound check, I get a bit worried about it. But to have in the back of your mind that you might have a panic attack at some stage and still get up and do it, I find that extraordinary.
That's what it really stood out to me. I mean, that's such a powerful way of really being able to be with that discomfort but not let it compromise a valued life. And that is what really often brings people into therapy, is that the experience of fear, for example, or the experience of anxiety really is stopping them from doing what they want to do. And there's quite I find it quite a helpful way of understanding. It's called the cycle of avoidance. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that at all.
No, I don't know.
Sometimes I find it really useful to understand, to be honest, a lot of discomfort that we experience in our lives. And so if you imagine that we could just use an example maybe of, doing an assignment, for example. We have a trigger of like the need to do the assignment, right? And so then after the trigger, we have our thoughts, feelings, and sensations about having to do it. So if you think about having to sit down and do an assignment, maybe you notice you're feeling worried, maybe you're feeling anxious, maybe you have thoughts about the fact that I don't know what I'm doing, I need to get a really good mark, and maybe there might be sensations in the body of anxiety. So when we experience that, we experience a level of discomfort, and for some people that starts to get really overwhelming. And when we experience discomfort, our natural urge or inclination is to avoid it or get rid of it. And so what often will show up in an example like that is that we feel this experience, it feels overwhelming, so we decide that we will procrastinate and avoid doing it. So the procrastination is a form of avoidance. So we're avoiding the discomfort that comes with having to do the assessment or the assignment. So you avoid it. And in that moment, what happens very rapidly in that decision is that you get a feeling of relief. So that discomfort goes away. And that short-term relief feeling is what's so addictive about this kind of cycle of avoidance, because we get reinforced for doing the avoidance. But if we look at how it comes back into a circle, is that in the longer term, now because we've avoided doing that assessment, we've now got less time. So we've got less time to do the assignment, which actually increases the feelings of stress. Now there's more pressure, and then we kind of keep going around in this circle. Does that kind of make sense?
Sure, it's cruel. But yeah, it makes
very
sense.
familiar with it.
Yeah, it is cruel.
I mean, at a basic level, it's like when you're procrastinating something, it's very simply you don't want to do it. And so you're just thinking, I'll do it later. And then straight away you get a little hit of like, oh, that feels good. The whole time you're talking about that, I was remembering what it was like to be at school when you get an assignment and part of you, when you get it, go, I'm going to start tonight. I'll do heaps tonight and I'll feel really good about it. And then the second you sit down with it, you go, oh, I got ages. And you just, and you put it off because you don't really want to do it.
It happens to me now all the time. And it's often, I mean, yes, of course, it's when I don't want to do it. But then often it's when I don't really know how there's a bunch of obstacles in front of me. And like, I don't know even where to start. It feels so overwhelming and like such a big job. I know it will get done at some point because there's a deadline in 2 weeks or whatever. But in that moment, I'm like, I don't know even where to start. So that's when that's when the procrastination kicks in. And I'll be like, I should check YouTube. I should check YouTube and watch a few backpack reviews actually, just while I'm here. And then I do that for 2 hours, and then it's like, oh well, time for bed. And then I've done nothing.
So it's like a short-term fix to relieve yourself of that uncomfortable feeling.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so if it was to come to something like in Luke's example, the cycle of avoidance could have been, I feel really panicked. I feel very worried about having a panic attack, so I'm not going to do the performance. Yeah. And so in that moment of making a decision to avoid doing the thing that's bringing on the fear, we feel immediate relief, like rapid relief. I don't have to feel this anymore. In making that decision, we might do other things, like it might be that you go to sleep, so you then really psychologically avoid that feeling. Or it might be that you use drugs and alcohol to avoid that feeling. Or it might be shopping or gambling, like any of those sorts of things move us away from that feeling of discomfort. But what Luke did was that he felt the fear, but he did it anyway. And I think that is where that's the power of vulnerability and the example of resilience, I think. But he had to sit with so much discomfort in order to do that.
But it's like,
does that kind of make
sense? Yeah.
So,
I mean, I guess in a way what Luke has done, and I can relate to this as well, not in exactly the same way, but he's sold tickets to a show, and there is a room full of people sitting there, and so there's a massive accountability that he's set up for himself in a way. He's set up this room of people where it's like, well, if I have to lean into this discomfort, I have to face this because otherwise I'm letting all those people down. And I've done that so many times where it's like I need that external accountability to get stuff done, because if it's not there, then it's like I will avoid it forever.
It's like like you're making a pre-commitment, like you're arranging something else that locks it in.
Yeah. And is that so? Em, is that a healthy and good thing to do? I guess it's case by case, but assuming that you don't have an audience of people sitting in a theater, and it's just you in front of your computer or wherever you are, is it a good thing to, instead of avoiding it and enter that cycle of avoidance, is it a good thing to kind of lean into that fear and just try the best you can to face that fear or discomfort?
Yeah. I mean, I think certainly first of all, being aware that this is the cycle I'm in, and particularly with panic, like first of all, being aware that these are just sensations that are showing up in my body. But it might be that you do want to enlist some support. Sometimes it might feel extraordinarily overwhelming for you to actually go and do the thing that you want to do. And that sometimes can be counterproductive. And so what I mean by that is, like, if you were afraid of public speaking and you were worried you were going to have a panic attack, and someone said you had to go and speak in front of 5,000 people, then if you did that actually just might be far too overwhelming and just really serve to reinforce that panic and the feeling of incompetence that might come with that. So we have to really be careful when we're, looking at how to cope with panic or anxiety, and doing it in a really titrated way. So making sure that you're doing it with the support of a therapist or with friends and family. And so we kind of want to get exposed a little bit to the feeling if we can, and then use some strategies to help you stay with that for as long as you can, but then not overwhelming yourself so that you just get flooded with fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if that kind of makes sense.
Advice, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I would think just thinking of things you're afraid of, if I went too far, I could just imagine, and I think it's happened to me in the past. Like, I used to be a bit afraid of public speaking. I don't think I am as much anymore, but I would do it. If I had to do it, I'd do it and I'd get panicked and I wouldn't do it very well, and it would just reinforce that I'm no good at it. And anyway.
Absolutely.
It's very personal anecdote.
There are some things that we could kind of have a look at now if you wanted to, which can really, from my perspective, can be quite helpful.
Please,
And I should acknowledge too that the way that I work, is not the way that all therapists work. And so this is just my approach. It's not certainly the answer at all for everyone's experiences.
But, but so yours is better though.
Yeah, definitely better.
Yeah. Are you comfortable, Em, in listing all the psychologists who you don't think are doing a good job?
In order.
I jest.
So I tend to work from a mindfulness-based and compassion-based perspective, and it's informed a lot by acceptance and commitment therapy. So some of you may have heard of that. But for me, again, the first thing is having a sense of or an awareness of what is happening in the body and noticing that these sensations aren't in any way harmful to me. But the second part for me is
sorry,
grounding.
can I just jump in just to set up this whole bit? I think it's really, this is for anyone who is putting off anything in their life, whether it's a really big decision, whether it's an assignment, whether it's public speaking, whatever it is, asking for feedback from your boss or whatever it is. So this is I'm guessing what you're doing here is for all of us. Anyone who's procrastinating at all, this is for everyone.
It's really for we could say it's for any feeling of anxiety or any feeling of discomfort that's showing up.
Okay. Yep.
And so, and particularly if it's a very strong feeling of anxiety or panic, the most important function, or the most important thing to me, is grounding and being present. So For example, when panic is really showing up or when there's an urge to avoid something overwhelming, we want to see if we can bring all of our attention to this present moment. And one of the ways which we can do that really quite quickly is to feel your feet on the floor. So I don't know if you guys can do that now, but even just noticing, like pushing your feet into the ground and noticing the sense of strength in your muscles that you're using to do that. And importantly, seeing if you can sense the feeling of touch. So noticing the sense of being grounded and connected to the floor. Do you notice that as we do that?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So this is called a grounding exercise, and we do this a lot in therapy, particularly when people are getting overwhelmed, really trying to bring our attention and awareness back to this present moment. So grounding with the feet. The other, you've probably, and some of you may have heard of this before, is noticing our senses. So our senses are a really good way of, again, bringing our attention to this present moment and unhooking us from that kind of fight or flight response. So even right now, if I could get you in your mind just to notice 5 things you can see in the room, if I can get you to do that.
All the cameras.
Me too.
Because there are 5 cameras.
Oh, good.
Not everyone will have 5 cameras pointed at them.
Yeah.
And I get you to touch 4 things. So opening your ears now and noticing what you can hear.
With headphones on, it's... Yep.
Yep. Noticing what you can taste. And taking a breath in, noticing what you can smell. Okay, and where is your attention right now as you're doing that?
Present bloody moment. You got me, Em. You bloody got me.
Yep.
Mine was, interestingly enough, was on my breathing for some reason.
Yeah,
as soon as we
mine was on my
finished that, I just
breathing.
took a really deep breath. A bigger one out, you'll be happy to know. A bigger breath out. But I noticed that. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
You're the
Me
same.
too.
So
Yeah.
we can, that's great. So we can notice that when we do that, we, not all the time, but we can actively shift our nervous system state so we can move from that fight or flight response into the relaxation response. The breathing slows. Even when you're taking that breath in and you're noticing smell, it's with a different purpose than that kind of anxious breathing. So we're noticing what we can smell, paying attention to this present. And we need that to kind of anchor us and make us feel a kind of a greater sense of strength or groundedness right here and right now. So I would encourage people, I wouldn't encourage people. People can try this if they would like to.
Them trying to make sure she abides by all the guidelines and rules set out by the...
Don't take my advice. Please just seek your own advice. But this is just one way that we can certainly help ourselves when we're feeling really overwhelmed.
Incredible, Em.
Yep.
Incredible.
Would that help if, I'm just thinking of examples of people worrying about things, would that be work for someone who potentially is having a 3rd child and already has 2 that they can't even cope with? Just
Hypothetically.
If that person's not coping with 2 and they're having a 3rd in July, is that... Yeah, okay, cool, good.
It's a good example. Yeah, you could do that a lot.
Okay, I'll tell that person.
Yeah, just do that every half hour of every day. Just do that.
It's pretty locked in. It's going to happen, but for that person. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so you really can't avoid that then, definitely.
No.
Yep.
Very
but this kind of
example.
actually, it actually kind of brings me to the underlying reasons as to why you would want to stay with the fear. And that to me really showed up around values. And I know that obviously Ben Croce has spoken to you guys a lot about values, but what often happens when we feel anxious and when we feel panicked is that when we act on that feeling, when we get overwhelmed by that feeling and we engage in avoidance, it moves us really in the opposite direction to that kind of valued living or that valued life that you want to create. Does that kind of make sense?
Totally.
Yeah, I was going to ask you before, does this lead into cognitive dissonance and cognitive cohesion? In that, I remember hearing a definition of cognitive dissonance where it's you're trying to avoid an unpleasant feeling, and so you make up these stories in your mind that, oh, this is okay, and it gets rid of that unpleasant feeling. but it actually forces you to be holding two sets of values in your brain that are contradictory. So delaying the homework is actually contradictory to the person you want to be and what you want to be doing and your values.
Exactly.
And what you want to be doing is living with cognitive cohesion, where you do the homework and you enact the value that you hold inside.
That's 100%. Yeah. And from an acceptance and commitment therapy point of view, and Russ Harris talks a lot about this, and I can give you some notes about that, but talks about this idea that, we're in essence trying to cultivate a rich and meaningful life, and a life that is worth living. And a life that's worth living is certainly infused with discomfort and feelings of anxiety and sadness and grief and loss and all those sorts of experiences. But it's the richness of that that creates something meaningful. And it's if we can stay with our values and holding them in our mind, that we really kind of create something that you might feel proud of, like a life that you feel proud of.
That's a pretty powerful concept.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Dr. M. Very
Dr.
good.
M. Dr. M. We're speechless. like three brilliant podcasters. Dr. M, thank you so much again. Unless you guys? I was going to wrap it up, but unless you guys,
it's a pretty powerful.
Yeah, way to
I just love doing this. Like, obviously, there's a personal connection, but just having someone who knows so much more than we do, and also the manner with which you kind of share the information, I really love it, and I think we're very lucky to have you on the podcast, Dr. M.
We sure are.
Oh, that's very kind, really. I could talk for a long time, so it's probably a very good thing you do.
Well, you have to split it into multiple episodes. We can't do everything in one.
But 7-hour episode with Dr. M.
But you will be back in a month's time for another Dr. M episode. We can't wait.
Yeah.
And potentially face-to-face, which is very exciting.
It is.
Yeah, that would be lovely.
Yeah. Thanks, Em. Great to see you.
Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you soon.
See ya.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.
If this episode has been triggering for you, we strongly recommend Lifeline on 131114. The Imperfects is hosted and co-produced by Hugh Van Cuylenberg, Ryan Shelton and Josh Van Cuylenberg. This episode was produced by Bridget Northeast, edited by Jamison Moore, filmed by Andy Poole and social mediated by George Martin. A special thanks to Dr. M for her expertise and guidance. We'd also like to thank the Resilience Project for their ongoing support. Our acknowledgement of country was delivered today by Jesse Motlop, and you can find Jesse's podcast, Deadly Discussions, on YouTube. Thanks for listening.